Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. We are going to give it just another minute or two before we get started with the webinar. Welcome to everybody who has joined us. It looks like we've had a few more people sign on in the last minute here. So I think we'll go ahead and get started. So let me begin by thanking all of today's attendees for joining us for the webinar, Empowering Controlled Vocabularies in Cortex. We appreciate you giving us some of your time today to learn about just one important feature of the Cortex platform. Before we begin the discussion, we want to go over a few meeting logistics. Today, we have a member of our team, Jillian Tweet, helping us with technical support, and we're very happy to have her join us. This is our team's first webinar using the GoToWebinar software, so please bear with us if there's any technical difficulties. All microphones have been muted and video capabilities have been disabled as well. For those of you that may not have a microphone in your computer, or if you are having trouble with computer audio, there are optional dial-in numbers available. If you are having any difficulty, please let Jillian know using the chat feature. Speaking of the chat feature, during the presentation, we ask that you submit any questions you have using chat. We have set aside a dedicated Q&A session for the end of today's webinar, and we'll make sure that anything that was submitted through the chat box is addressed at the end. And finally, we want to let you know that today's webinar is being recorded, and we will make this recording available to attendees and on our website as soon as possible. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Today's webinar is being hosted by Adam Matthew Digital's North America Cortex sales team. My name is Katie Gambone, and I am joined by my colleague Jessica Kowalski. Both Jessica and I have been experience working in archives, and we love connecting with repositories and learning more about your collections and your needs. We are part of a much larger team here at Adam Matthew dedicated to Cortex that includes the Cortex development team, our customer support team, Cortex marketing, and more. Cortex is a digital collections platform from Adam Matthew Digital. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with us, Adam Matthew Digital is an award-winning publisher of primary source content. Our company is based out of the United Kingdom, and this year we are very happy to be celebrating our 30th anniversary of curating and showcasing archival collections. Cortex is a cloud-based, fully hosted solution developed by Adam Matthews' skilled team of engineers who have experience developing earlier versions of our platform. Unlike earlier versions of the digital collections platform that our team has built, Cortex was crafted to allow our editorial team to be able to build collections from inception through publication independently without requiring intervention from our programmers. As such, the administrative interface of Cortex is both intuitive and has simple workflows. Today, we'll actually hear from one member of our editorial team who has built Adam Matthews' newest database, Mass Observation Project, in Cortex. Adam Matthew also developed Cortex so that it can be used independently by academic and cultural heritage institutions to publish digitized special collections and archives content from your own collections. So what that means, in Cortex as a digital collections platform, it has two main capabilities. On the My Assets side of the platform, that is a data asset management system. Here you can store your assets, catalog, build collections, and more. We'll be taking a look at My Assets as part of the demo today. My Sites is our content management side of the platform, and this is essentially where you manage all web publication. So here, administrative users can design your websites. This is also where administrators will be building digital exhibits. In Cortex, you are managing a single instance of an asset, and then through a simple process, you can publish the asset in multiple collections. As you see here with the Oak Grove Farm collection, it's been published in multiple collections. We've also shared it in multiple exhibits and multiple static pages without having to manage multiple instances of the asset. Since releasing Cortex to a larger group of repositories in mid-2018, Cortex has grown to support a growing global client base, as we've shown you some examples here. Towson University, Goldie Beacom College, Pasadena City College, and a newer client, Des Plaines Public Library, are some of our newest Cortex customers who we've welcomed this spring and summer. We look forward to working with each of these repositories over the next several months as they begin the migration process. Several of our clients you see listed here have publicly available Cortex sites, and we would encourage you to visit their platforms and explore. You can find links to their sites from our Cortex corporate site, which is cortexcollections.com. As I mentioned earlier, today we are very excited to be joined by one member of our editorial team, Nick Jackson, who spearheaded the Mass Observation Project. To give you some context into this collection, Mass Observation Project is sourced from content collections at the Mass Observation Archive, which is a pioneering social research organization based at the University of Sussex. The Mass Observation Archive was actually founded in 1937 by anthropologist Tom Harrison, filmmaker Humphrey Jennings, and poet Charles Madge. Their aim was to create an anthropology of ourselves. And to do that, they recruited a team of observers and a panel of volunteer writers to study the everyday lives of ordinary people in Britain. An initial launch of this database, known as Mass Observation Online, covered responses from the period 1937 to 1967, and it is one of Adam Matthew Digital's signature collections. Our newest installment, known as Mass Observation Project, covers responses to directives dating from the 1980s onward. And as we'll see today, this has been built on the Cortex platform. Mass Observation provides digital access to a unique life-writing archive capturing the everyday experiences, thoughts, and opinions of people. Writing in response to directives, which are basically questionnaires, hundreds of mass observers provide a unique insight into an extraordinary range of subjects, from the deeply personal to everyday life to global affairs. The unique nature and matchless depth of this material makes Mass Observation Project an invaluable resource. In organizing this collection for a virtual audience, it forced our editorial team to make unique decisions about discoverability. And on today's webinar, you'll see that controlled vocabularies played a critical role in that process. So with that, I will turn it over to Nick.
Thank you, Katie. Hello, everyone. Lovely to have you here to listen to us today. So I don't think I need to introduce Mass Observation any more than Katie already has, other than to say that I spent most of the last 18 months to 2 years, I would say, putting together the Mass Observation site for our new release, which is our first release in Quartex, the first Adam Matthew product to be made in our new platform. And one of the things that proved absolutely invaluable for being able to use Cortex to put Mass Observation together was controlled vocabulary. It was an essential tool for linking all of the hundreds and hundreds, thousands of assets together in ways in which we knew users would want to link them themselves. So I'm going to use Mass Observation today to demonstrate some controlled vocabulary functionality and versatility. So I am just going to attempt to take control of Katie's screen. I think I successfully have. There we are. It all works. So this is the homepage of Mass Observation. Just as a bit of background, what is controlled vocabulary in Quartex? So Quartex has a number of types of metadata field, and controlled vocabulary is one of them. And it describes a piece of metadata that resides in a fixed list and is therefore able to form the basis of a filtering of the assets. And the most obvious contrast to that is a free text metadata field, which is just whatever you want it to be. But controlled vocabulary has a fixed list of terms. And the basis of all functionality of CV metadata is the same. You can filter the assets using it. So I'm just going to demonstrate a few of the ways in Mass Observation which we've employed that particular tool. So if I browse all documents, the default is to go to the list of all the documents, all the assets in the site, which is just under 18,000 as it stands. We separated all of the directives and all the responses. Each response is a separate asset, and as I say, we linked them together using CV. So the simplest way to filter by a CV term is to have it visible in an asset's metadata. So for example, you can see here the 1981 Royal Wedding Special Directive has multiple key topics associated with it, all of which are CV. You can see the little clickable lozenge, which indicates a piece of controlled vocabulary metadata. So if we click on Royal Wedding, as an example, that will filter the doc list by or filter it down to all the documents, all the assets which contain the term royal wedding. So that's the simplest way of using controlled vocabulary as a filter, simply having it display in an asset's metadata. You can see also there are filters down the left-hand side of the screen. And again, they are controlled vocabulary fields. All of these filters, directive title, document, manuscript or typescript, etc. Each of those is a controlled vocabulary field which has been set up in the back end as a sidebar filter. And that's the most straightforward way of giving people the opportunity to filter by more than one CV term at once. So each of these lists contains all the terms in the controlled vocabulary list for that that field. So if, for example, I click on living arrangements and open that list, let's say you're interested in people living with children only and with a partner and children at the same time, you can filter by both of those CV fields at once. And so if I just apply that, that will winnow the doc list down further to only those documents which contain royal family in their metadata and are by respondents who live with children. And that sort of piling on of search terms can be tweaked if you want in the current search criteria box at the top of the screen. So for example, if you decide you actually want to see all all responses by people living with children, then you can clear the key topics filter and it'll just give you a much bigger list. So that is, as I say, the most straightforward way of filtering by more than one CV term at once. There is another way of in Cortex of basically doing that, but it's particularly useful if you have a filter list which is very long. So obviously, you know, I opened the living arrangements list. There's, I don't know how many that is, about eight different options. The key topics list, on the other hand, is over 100. So that would be quite unwieldy to put in a sidebar filter. So another way of doing the same thing, which we've employed, is to use what in Cortex is called search categories behind the scenes. We've called it filter options for the purpose of the front end because it's a bit more user-friendly for people using the site. So if I click on filter by key topics, this is a particular type of page in Cortex, which is, again, the same principle. It is a filter. I'm just going to try and open that. There we are. Which it can display any number of terms you like, but obviously it's particularly useful in a case like this when you've got a lot. And again, like the sidebar filters, you can filter by multiple terms at once. So let's go for, I don't know, holidays and leisure, for example. Close that. And that immediately gives us the fact that it has 4,511 results, even without actually displaying them. But let's do that. So yeah, you can also, we haven't done it here, but you can also put multiple lists in the same page. So if you wanted to filter by a number of topics and by the respondents themselves, for example, at the same time, you can do that. You can build the functionality that way if we wanted to. Yes, that's just another useful way of filtering. The final way we've used CV in mass observation is to build a filter from a thumbnail image, which is simply a static URL. You can make any CV term into a static URL, which thereby, by clicking on it, filters by that term. One of the ways we decided was going to be most useful for users to get into the directives from the homepage of the site was to browse by directive. The directives are on known topics, and we decided it made sense that people would want to be able to browse them. So we set up a pictorial browse page, which is this. And so clicking on any directives image takes you to a doc list of all the responses to that directive, and what powers that is simply a piece of control vocabulary, which is the title of the directive. So clicking on the Royal Wedding Special one will display all the responses to that directive, all of which of course have the directive title as a piece of CV and their metadata, which I'm just hovering over there. So that's a good way of, if you want to display filter options very, very prominently, having an entire pictorial page dedicated to them, then that's the way of doing it. And as I say, all you do, if you want to get a URL which links by a piece of CV, is to right-click on the control vocabulary, and that will produce a static URL. So that's a bit of a tour of how we've actually used CV in MassOb as far as what the user sees goes. But if I now take you behind the scenes, I can actually show you a bit more about the working of it as you would deploy it as somebody building a site yourself. So this is my assets in Cortex, and this is the document fields page in the configuration menu, which I'm just hovering over. So this page contains all the metadata fields in the entire Adam Matthew client, which is, and we're building a lot of projects in Quartex at the moment, so there's an awful lot of fields, and they're split up by collection because that makes them much easier to navigate. So if I just open the mass observation project fields, these are all the fields used in MassOb. As you can see, there are different types of field, and control vocabulary and free text are the most common. There are a couple of other kinds, but they're the most common ones to use. So if I just open the key topics field, which obviously we've been looking at a moment ago, that will give us some options relating to it. And that is, as you can see, a control vocabulary field. And if you select CV as your field type, then you will get a number of options at the bottom of this page. All CV fields have to have a linked CV list. The list can start off blank, but it has to exist. So you will select your list from this drop-down menu that I'm hovering over, or you can create a new one by visiting the control vocabularies page, which we'll do so in a moment. And then there are two other important options. One is whether you allow multiple entries to be selected. What that means is if you want a given metadata field to contain multiple CV terms at the same time, as obviously with key topics we did. You'll recall that most of the directives have 7 or 8 key topics attached to them. Then you can enable that. If you only want to restrict it to a single entry, so for example you have a list of countries and you know that each asset pertains to one country and only one, then you can not allow multiple entries to be selected, and that prevents anyone from inadvertently tagging a document with multiple terms that you don't want. The other important choice to make is whether you allow new unique entries. So as I say, you can start off with a CV list which is totally blank, and you can allow new entries. So this is what we did for the key topics. We built our list as we indexed, because we were going through the material and coming across new key topics which we wanted to include. And if you say yes to unique entries, every time you import some metadata in that field, then it will add those entries to the list. But you need to approve them as the project editor before an asset which has a new entry is publishable, and this prevents terms that you don't want to be there, whether that's a whole term you just don't want, it's inadvertent, or it's a typing error, or it's a term which you decide overlaps with the one you already have, or whatever it might be. That prevents them getting through to any kind of published asset. The alternative, of course, is to have a set list from the beginning. So you say no to unique entries, using the example of countries, as I did earlier. You've got 10 countries, you know that your entire asset corpus relates to all of those and nothing more. So they are completely set. And if you try to import an asset which has a new entry in that field, then that line of imported metadata will fail. It'll say, no, you can't have this. So that prevents, just if you don't want anything new, then that's obviously the easiest way of preventing new things from appearing, is to just not allow them at all. So yes, so the list can be sort of an organic process as part of your indexing process, or it can be static right from the beginning, and it just depends on what you want to do with that particular field, what kind of information it is that you're including in it. So that is setting up the CV field, but obviously it needs a list. So if we just go to, again, get the configuration tab, and I'm just slipping out the control vocabularies page, this will show us, again, this is everything on the Adam Matthew client, so this is an awful lot of stuff, but this is all the control vocabulary lists which we use. They're not nested by collection as with the fields, so it's a good idea if you're using a lot of them to preface the name with the name of your collection. So MOP, Mass Observation Project, are all together. And if I just find the key topics again, now where is that? I think that's down the bottom. Response key topics, there we are. So I've called it 103 options, which is why we use the filter options page rather than having it as a sidebar filter. It's far too long for that. So as you can see, there's a count column, so which just shows all the number of assets which use each particular term. If you don't like a term, you can delete it. You just get rid of it from the list. And obviously there are none awaiting approval, as you can see, 0 at the top, because this project is complete. But as the list was open, new terms could be added. Every time I would have added a term or imported a document that had new terms in, the list would ask me to approve them, and I would just have to take them off in the left-hand column, and then they would be approved, and then any asset which had them would then be publishable. And you can also copy, if you want to pick up some or all items in the list and copy them into a different one. You can also do that. There are buttons for that at the top. So that's probably really it. But I think in this particular context, as I was talking about the key topics list here, I think one thing that's worth adding, that's relevant, particularly to material in manuscript, if you're using that in your site, restricting indexing vocabulary to a set list, as obviously we have here. It's a great aid to searchability if you direct people towards it, or you try to make them use that list for filtering rather than doing a site search. Because obviously with manuscript assets, the only thing that's searchable at site level is going to be the metadata. So if, for example, I've used the term advertising here. We haven't used advertisement or ad or publicity or whatever else. We've just used advertising to refer to that concept. And so directing people towards this list is when you have a very significant proportion of manuscript material in your collection, as we do in MassOb, is very useful, because if people know that if they're interested in advertising, if they filter by that term, they will get their results. much more reliably than doing a free text search for whatever particular variant of that term they choose, which will get them hits in typed printed material, of course, if it's been OCR'd in the platform, which we have for what we have in MassOb, but it won't get them results in manuscript. So it's just a useful way of propelling people towards results which are going to be the richest that they can get. So which is certainly what we've tried to do in this. So yeah, I think I've said everything I need to say. So Katie, I will hand back to you.
Thanks, Nick. I'm sorry, I was muted, so it took me just a second to get connected again. Well, thank you very much, Nick, for that overview of controlled vocabularies and how you use that to make some decisions in, the building of the mass observation project. I am scrolling through some slides to something we put together before we open it up for the general question and answer session. As we are giving demos of the Cortex platform, we often get some questions about controlled vocabularies, and so we thought we would cover some of those here before we open it up to the larger group. So one of the questions we often receive are controlled vocabularies such as Library of Congress subject headings preloaded into Cortex. And the answer to that question is that they are not preloaded at this time. LCSH is quite extensive, and loading the entire controlled vocabulary would impact performance on the platform. So we are considering adding Library of Congress subject headings, but it likely will not be dynamic, but it is something that we are exploring. Also, though, we have found that every archive is unique and has unique collections that may require custom controlled vocabularies, as we saw today with the example of mass observation. So, we have several clients who are using controlled vocabularies pretty extensively. And so if you would like to, discuss your own scenarios or take a look at some other examples from other clients, please reach out to us and we'd be happy to walk you through some of our clients' sites as well. The next question, can I share searches based on controlled vocabularies? And the answer to this question is yes, you can. So as Nick was showing us from the demo of the front end of the mass observation site, as he was filtering lists by controlled vocabularies, it did create it creates a unique URL that you can then share using, there's a share functionality on the Cortex site. What's really nice is that a researcher can also save searches based on these pre-filtered controlled vocabularies list using the Cortex My Accounts feature as well. So, it is possible to do that, and I know that's helpful for reference librarians who may want to share searches in their Cortex database with researchers or researchers who are wanting to do some of that saving on their own. Next, if I have more than one website associated with my Cortex license, can I set up different controlled vocabularies on each site? Can they be the same? The answer to this question is yes, you can. So in Cortex, for those of you who may not be aware, we do have, you're only ever managing sort of one side to My Accounts. So you're only managing one copy of your assets, but you can publish those assets to multiple front-facing websites. So that can be a different look and design, and that can also include different controlled vocabularies. So that is something that gets set up on the back end of the platform. And again, if you're interested in taking a look at that, if you're a repository that would need to consider multiple front-facing sites, we'd be happy to talk with you about that and also what that might look like from the administrative side. And then finally, what administrative checks are there to help me manage controlled vocabularies? And I think that Nick did talk about this a little bit as he was covering the administrative side of the platform. But in Cortex, assets can only be published if they're essentially they cannot be published. Sorry, let me walk backwards for a second. Assets in Cortex cannot be published if there is a required metadata field that hasn't been filled out, or if a new controlled vocabulary term has been submitted that requires approval by the administrator, or if there is a variation on an approved term. And so again, that is sort of some checks and balances that we have on the platform. And, again, happy to go into that in more detail for folks who are interested. So with that, I will open it up to Q&A. And I think, Jillian, you are helping keep an eye on the chat box for us. So please let us know if any questions have come up.
Yeah, hi guys. So first of all, I do see a question for Nick. It's asking, Nick, how did you find using Cortex as compared to other digital collection tools?
Well, so obviously I am an Adam Matthew editor, so the only digital collection tools I'd previously used were Adam Matthew's own proprietary ones, which, unlike Quartex, are not ones which anyone else has previously had access to. So I can only really answer that from an Adam Matthew perspective. But I can say that Quartex is enormously better than the previous platform that we had, in the sense that there's much more editorial control over the functionality, the building. Previously, using our previous platform, you, as an editor, somebody in my position, you basically put together your images and your metadata, and then you handed that plus a set of criteria over to our software development team, who then built a site using the platform which they had developed. And then that came back to you, and then obviously if you had questions or there were bugs and so on, you had lots of back and forth with the developers. One of the big advantages of Cortex is that an awful lot of those things you can do yourself. So as an example, if I wanted to, I got my Cortex site, I'm looking at the filters, the filter list in the left-hand column, and I decide I want to add another filter in. There's a particular piece of metadata I want to be a filter. Previously, I'd have had to go to our development team and beg for some of their time to get them to go back to the development and put that in, because I hadn't previously specified it, and now they have to. In Cortex, that takes literally seconds to do. If my metadata is there, I just need to go into the back end, make it into a filter, publish the site, and then there it is. So from my point of view, that was the great boon of Cortex, is that there's lots of build related things, functionality things, which you can just do as a user, as an editor, which doesn't need software development. So that was, compared to my previous experience, and as I say, I can only talk from an Adam Matthew perspective, that is its greatest asset.
Terrific. We have a couple more questions coming in. How popular are the pictorial browse pages proving to be as a starting point for searchers? Does the visual image on screen attract users into browsing the mass observation project?
I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. I hope it is. It's very early days. I mean, we only released mass observation in June. So the various, there almost certainly are statistics available through Google Analytics or platforms like that to find out the answers to questions like that. I haven't delved into them yet. anecdotally, I mean, we did run internal sessions, so sort of when the design was in progress to get feedback from different people in different departments of Adam Matthew as to how user friendly this site was, and how they went into documents, how they navigated it. And yeah, it was pretty unanimous that a page like that was extremely useful, because, as I say, if you're faced with this corpus of material which is based around these regular directives which are on specific topics, it seems reasonable to assume that an awful lot of people will start off by thinking, well, what am I interested in? And so, because obviously there are 39, I think, directives in the 1980s, presenting those as simply a pictorial menu seemed an intuitive way forward, and it certainly, the feedback that we got internally was that was the case. But I hope people are using it like that. I don't know that they are for certain yet, but perhaps you can find out in future.
Yeah, that sounds like something we can learn over time. I have another question. How might Cortex handle LCHS complex subject types? Would the subject copyright advertisements be read as a single controlled vocab term, or would copyright and advertisement be recognized as separate terms and independently searchable or linkable?
Is that addressed to me? I'm afraid I'm not familiar with that particular those particular terminology. I'm not sure about that.
So I think that is referring to the Library of Congress subject headings. And as I said earlier, that is not that directory is not currently loaded into Cortex. And so, you know, any subject headings that you wanted to load into Cortex would be done manually and entered into a metadata field. So, you know, if there's specific examples or specific collections that you want to talk about or take a look at with us, we're happy to do that. And I would certainly encourage you to reach out to us and kind of set up a conversation to take a look at that together.
Yeah, I think I'd just like to add that controlled vocabularies are just one of the tools in Cortex that if you choose, you could instead of having a controlled vocabulary, you can have a free text field. And Cortex enables the ability to do batch edits. So you can choose an entire collection and include some sort of copyright information, for example. And if you needed that to change, you're absolutely able to overwrite all that information in one swoop and not have to go search for individual assets.
At this point, that's all of the questions in the box. I encourage folks to, to add a couple more questions as you have them.
One question that I actually have for Nick. So the mass observation project you mentioned was just under 18,000 assets. Can you give us a sense of how long, I guess, it took your team to build that collection? And I guess, was the controlled vocabulary work a significant part of that workflow? And do you have a sense of how long that kind of work took for your team?
Well, so the controlled vocabulary, I suppose, putting those lists together was intimately bound up with our indexing of the documents in general. Really, it was part of the process. Obviously, as I said before, you make the decision whether you want a field to be controlled vocabulary or not. That was something that we decided, I suppose, towards the beginning of our indexing process. And then, having done that and decided that it is, you establish whether it's a static list or a dynamic one. But in terms of actually indexing the documents, adding metadata to each asset, that's just having made those decisions about the type of field, it's just bound up with that process, really. So it doesn't add it doesn't add any more work, compiling the list, say, it doesn't add any more work to what I think you'd be doing anyway. It's just the particular way that you've chosen to do it. In terms of how long, I mean, it's a very broad question how long making the whole site took. I mean, the indexing of the assets took hundreds of hours. I mean, I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, but you appreciate going through 18,000 of them. Even using a lot of information from the mass observations own catalog, which we had at our disposal, that takes a long time. But if you're asking whether employing any kind of CV element in your indexing of your material, it adds to the time it takes to do. No, it's just choices that you make, and then I mean you might even argue that if you decide on a list of controlled vocabulary, which particularly if it's a set list from the beginning, that actually saves you time in as much as you might otherwise have to think more about how to fill in certain fields, whereas when you have perhaps you have a set list of terms, and you just choose the most appropriate one from among them, and that perhaps that saves you time. Obviously, all material is different, and all decisions like that are different. But no, CV itself does not take up more time. It's just a tool, and a very good one, I think.
We do have a couple more questions on this end. The first is, does the term approval weighting function serve to catch spelling errors as well as review intentional words?
So any unique string of characters that you enter into a CV metadata field counts for the platform's purposes as a new entry. So if you spell the same thing in two different ways, you will get two different entries resulting from those. If you capitalize a term sometimes and not other times, then those will count as those two different forms will count as two different entries. So yes, you can winnow out most obviously spelling errors by doing an import, looking at your controlled vocabulary list and discovering that you have multiple terms spelled multiple ways, and then obviously you can not approve the ones you don't like. So yeah, it's a useful spell check as much as anything else.
Okay, and one more. If a user enters the term marketing, are they automatically directed to an asset with the term advertising?
No. So in order to if you do a site search for a term which happens to be for a string, a search term which happens to be a controlled vocabulary term, then you will get hits obviously in any asset which contains that term. But there's no provision for variant forms. So obviously, if you wanted to make provision for that, if for example you anticipated that people would they might search for advertising or they might search for marketing, the way to account for that, or to accommodate that rather, is to simply have both of those things as controlled vocabulary terms, and set your list so that, or set that field rather, so that you can have multiple entries in that field, and tag a document with both advertising and marketing every time you come across either. But this sort of harks back to what I was saying earlier about the usefulness of having a set list and directing people towards it. If you pointed people to, if you had, say for example, just the term advertising, if you pointed people towards your list of all your topic terms, and encouraged them to browse that and to sort of match the concept that they wanted to search for with the most appropriate term that's likely to have been used for it. In this instance, they may well think, so okay, marketing, that's similar to advertising, that's the term that's been used, so I will do my search via that. So it's just two different approaches to the same issue, really. It's whether you attempt to accommodate what you think people are likely to search for, or you try to steer them towards what the vocabulary you have used, and if you've been consistent in your use of vocabulary, then you can make them use those in their searching, or not even searching, filtering by those, and then hopefully that way ensure that they have the richest results that are available to them.
Okay, I think I'm seeing another question. Does Cortex require the use of CV, or does it also allow for free text searching?
No, there's no requirement to use controlled vocabulary at all. As I said, there are multiple kinds of metadata field that you can choose. Free text is the other most common one. Much of MassOb is in free text fields. It just depends whether you want the capability of filtering your assets by a particular set of terms, and if that isn't useful to you, then there's no need to use CV at all if you don't want to.
Okay, at this time, I don't have any new questions coming in.
Great. Well, thank you again for everybody who submitted a question, and to everybody who joined us today, and especially a big thank you to Nick for talking to us about controlled vocabularies and how you use them in Mass Observation Project. Also, thank you to Jillian for joining us and running the webinar for us today. There are other ways that you can connect with Cortex. We've listed some of them here. So if you want to take a screenshot and take a look around, we'd be happy to also connect with you on a personalized demo. Both Jessica and my email addresses are provided here as well. So thank you again to everybody, and we will go ahead and end today's webinar. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.